downfall of Phillip Schofield was something astronomical. He was on TV screens for what seemed like a lifetime. And then, with a blink of an eye, he was gone. This is the downfall of Phillip Schofield, and we tell his story. Phillip Schofield was born in 1962, and early on in his career, he had ambitions to work on the TV. While those ambitions, they become true. He worked in New Zealand as a children's TV presenter before moving back to the UK and working for TV show CBBC. Whilst working for CBBC, Phillip Schofield met a lady called Stephanie Lowe. And while Phillip Schofield would go on to marry Stephanie and have 2 children. At this time, Phillip Schofield was 31 years old. He had 2 daughters, a wife. He was living the high life, and he was a presenter on hit TV show This Morning. And so again, at the age of 31, life was going pretty well for Phillip Schofield. He joined This Morning on ITV, and he became co-presenter with none other than Fern Britton. And this on-screen relationship would last a number of years. So Phillip Schofield joined This Morning in 2002. He co-presented right up until the year of 2009. So this left Phillip Schofield as the main presenter of This Morning. But of course, that wouldn't work. We needed a co-presenter. In comes Holly Willoughby. And this really, for me, is almost, I would say, the beginning of the downfall for Phil Schofield. And to some degree, you've got to say, probably the downfall of Holly Willoughby as well. Why, you might ask? Well, we'll get into that later on in the video. So Phil Schofield and Holly Willoughby presenting This Morning. We've got to be absolutely honest. It was received very well, and both Phil and Holly would go on to present a number of other TV programmes. Some of those programmes being game shows, but the one that stands out the most, the duo went on to co-host Dancing on Ice. And not just that, they were becoming quite notorious as presenters and personalities. Everybody remembers them hosting, or at least being part of the awards ceremonies. They would often turn up drunk, and it was said that they'd party all night, and instead of going home, they'd go straight to the ITV studios, and in the morning, they'd present This Morning. However, this was soon to take a sharp shift, so a sharp turn in their presenting careers. A lot of viewers and a lot of people in general were starting to say that both Phil and Holly were beginning to get ahead of themselves. The first lot of criticism came after both Phil Schofield and Holly Willoughby were to interview celebrity star Kerry Katona on This Morning. During the interview, it becomes quite uncomfortable. Phil Schofield sees that Kerry Katona, well, her body language is off, she's slurring her words, and she seems somewhat agitated. Instead of stopping the interview at that point, Phillip Schofield on live TV asks Kerry Katona if she's under the influence. Now, of course, at this point, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, would have viewed this clip either live, so watching the live show, or shortly after. Kerry Katona's response in the interview was that she was on prescription medication, and that the medication that she was on was affecting her speech and, of course, her body language. And a lot of people, again, found this clip quite uncomfortable. The fact that Phil and Holly decided to go ahead with the interview. Because if you think about this, they would have spoken and they would have seen Kerry Katona before they went live. So at that point, why didn't Phillip Schofield say to Kerry before they were live on air? Something seems off. Why did he not question her at that point and say, "Are you under the influence?" It was almost like he wanted to get her onto live TV. He took that moment to embarrass her in front of the whole world. And I think at this point, many people were seen through that TV personality persona. And really, they were seeing the absolute real characteristics of Phillip Schofield. Around this time, Eamon Holmes and Ruth, so his wife at the time, were also co-presenting This Morning. And they'd actually spoken up a number of times to say that they'd had bad run-ins with Phillip Schofield. And actually, in terms of TV and presenting, Eamon Holmes went on to advise that Phillip Schofield had taken a disliking to him, and that actually he'd blocked a lot of avenues for Eamon and Ruth. So again, this was almost an example of Phillip Schofield standing on top of the mountain, sort of the king of the castle, and looking down at everybody and deciding to take advantage of what he wanted and choosing to open doors for people who he took a liking to. Shortly after the Kerry Katona incident on This Morning, Phillip Schofield and Holly Willoughby had then UK Prime Minister David Cameron on This Morning show. They managed to sit down with David Cameron and they were asking him a number of insightful questions. At one point, Phillip Schofield gets out a piece of paper and he hands the paper to David Cameron. It's said to be that the piece of paper had a list of celebrities and different individuals that were allegedly part of a scandal. Why Phillip Schofield chose to do it at that specific time whilst on air was bizarre, because ultimately ITV and This Morning Productions ended up getting fined £125,000 because when Phillip Schofield passed David Cameron the paper with the list of names on live air, one of the names got leaked to the public and that person ended up suing ITV. So again, this was another example of Phillip Schofield's bizarre personality. He was almost coming across as if he had the lock and key to every door. 2020 hit, and for Phillip Schofield, this took another turn. After being married to his wife for a number of years and having 2 children, so 2 daughters, Phillip Schofield on This Morning show, so live on air, came out as a homosexual. As part of this edit, specifically for Phillip Schofield and what he wanted to tell the public and the world, he advised the viewers that although he'd been married for a number of years and that he'd had 2 children, he initially thought he was bisexual. This announcement was mostly met by approval, and most people, viewers, other celebrities, said that he was quite courageous and brave. Although I can't help but think that as part of his marriage, he maybe could have done that off screen, because it doesn't all feel that there was an element of his wife being led on. In my opinion, the fact that this happened in 2020, I feel sort of alleviated some of the pressure and, let's say, some of the criticism for what was about to come out regarding Phillip Schofield. In 2022, it was unfortunately the year that the Queen had passed away. This again brought forward an example of both Phillip Schofield and Holly Willoughby's horrible personalities and characteristics. So the Queen had died, and a lot of people wanted to say their last goodbyes. There was queues. There was thousands and thousands of people and celebrities in queues. People waited almost 24 hours or more in queues just to say their last goodbyes to the Queen. As an example, none other than Sir David Beckham was in the queue. And this wasn't a celebrity VIP queue. It was in a queue with normal average people. He was mourning the Queen like everybody else was mourning the Queen. And he joined the queue. We all know what people in the UK are like about queues. Nobody likes other people cutting in the queue or going ahead of them if they've been waiting for a while. But in step Phillip Schofield and Holly Willoughby. Never mind that people have been waiting 24 hours for this moment. Never mind that the queues are almost 10 miles long around the outskirts of London. They turned up. They skipped the queue almost instantly, and they said their last goodbyes to the Queen. This was being reported all around the UK, if not around the world. The fact that they just turned up, never mind the queue, they'd skipped the queue, and they decided, well, we are more important than all these people. I'm sorry, but if David Beckham can wait in a queue for almost 6 hours, Phillip Schofield can. And so this was being reported around the UK, but regardless of the criticism they were being faced with, Holly Willoughby was to defend both herself and Phillip Schofield by advising that they were there just in a professional manner. Just 1 year later, so in the year of 2023, is when Phillip Schofield finally felt the pressure coming on him. He announced on live air that he was leaving this morning for good. He announced that the reason he was leaving was because he loved the show and he wanted to do what he thought was best, but he gave no context to this. It was almost like he knew what was coming out on him. Somebody had given him the heads up to say, listen, we've got news, it's really bad, and they're going to be reporting on it. And so, in no less than 2 weeks later, it came out that Phillip Schofield had been having a relationship with a 15-year-old Matthew McGreevy. It was everywhere. It was on the TV, it was on the news, it was on the radio. And of course, because Phillip Schofield had felt the pressure at that point, he had to come out again and give his view on this. Phillip Schofield advised that he met Matthew McGreevy when he was 15 years old. Phillip Schofield advised that they had initially met at a drama school. Phillip said that they quickly became friends and they started to interact with each other on social media and text message. Phillip Schofield stressed, and he stressed quite hard, that no romantic relationship started until Matthew McGreevy was 20 years old. Are you sure about that, Phillip? I remember personally that there was a social media influencer, I think his name was Jack Jones, and what he used to do is he'd go around in public and he'd sort of try and humiliate people. He'd tickle them, he'd tell them jokes, and he'd video it for content. There was one specific video where I think he was in a pub or a restaurant and he lets off a victory balloon. The balloon goes off, out comes confetti, and if you look at the back of the video, there is Phillip Schofield sat in this restaurant with a very young looking Matthew McGreevy. I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. So as you can see, it's Phillip Schofield and alleged Matthew McGreevy on a romantic lunch, let's say. Jack Jones, the social media influencer at the time, advised that Phillip Schofield had begged him not to publish that video. Jack Jones went on to say that Phillip actually said it would ruin his career if he was to publish it. But of course, the rest is history. He went on to publish it, and I've just shown you the evidence. Now, of course, there's alleged grooming allegations in regards to Phillip Schofield, because he had initially met this Matthew McGreevy at 15 years old. As I've already advised, Phillip Schofield would stress to the public that no romantic relationship took place until Matthew was 20 years old. But you can't help but think, although it's not been proven, that there would have been interactions from Phillip when Matthew was 15 years old. And this is where the alleged, let's say, allegations come into play, and people say, well, Phillip Schofield must have groomed Matthew McGreevy. There was also a time, and this goes back to the point I made earlier, about him standing on the mountain, almost king of the castle, with the lock and key, opening doors for people of which he took an interest to. And again, this is an example because Phillip Schofield got Matthew McGreevy a job as a runner on ITV's This Morning. Now, this isn't an easy job to come by. But of course, Phillip Schofield was able to get that role for young Matthew. There was also allegations, although again, to some degree not proven, that Matthew McGreevy was taking taxis from the ITV studios to Phillip Schofield's flat in London. And that these taxi expenses were being paid by none other than the ITV studios. Although again, I have to say that's alleged and it's somewhat not proven. If you didn't know, Phillip Schofield also has a brother called Timothy Schofield. In 2021, he was sentenced to 12 years in imprisonment. And this was for offences against a teenage boy. There was also a part of Timothy's trial that came out in the public, whereby Timothy had advised that he'd had conversations with his brother, so Phillip Schofield, about these interactions with the teenage boy. At the time, it's alleged that Phillip Schofield had turned around to his brother Timothy and said, please do not disclose anything further to me. And Phillip Schofield had reportedly said, you need help, you need a doctor. I don't know about a doctor, Phillip, he probably needed the police. But regardless of this, Timothy Schofield was handed a 12-year prison sentence. Now, of course, at this time, the allegations have come out in the public regarding Phillip Schofield and young Matthew McGreevy. Not forgetting that when Matthew was 20 years old, Phillip Schofield was somewhat like 53 years old. But of course, this was straining relationships on air and off air because his co-host, Holly Willoughby, had at this time began to push Phillip Schofield to a side because she was getting a lot of the abuse and harassment as well. You've got to think of it. They were a pair together. So from 2019 all the way up until around 2022, 2023, they were a pair of co-hosts. When you thought about Phillip Schofield, you thought about Holly Willoughby. They were almost like the Ant and Dec, let's say. And of course, because she was being tarnished with the same brush as Phillip, she also decided to leave This Morning and to push Phillip as far away as possible. I promise you, we're getting towards the end of this Phillip Schofield scandal story. Phillip Schofield, shortly after leaving This Morning, disappeared for what I want to say was around 16 months. You barely heard anything about him. Now and then in the paper, you would probably see a photo of Phillip walking back from Asda in his pyjamas and Crocs. Other than that, you saw nothing of him. And then almost randomly, and out of the blue, 16 months later, Channel 5 released a documentary called Castaway. Phillip Schofield was to be put in a jungle without a camera crew. He was to film it for himself. He was to fend for himself, essentially. And basically, the reason for the documentary was that he was going to give a heartfelt message to the UK public on how he felt he had been wronged himself and how everybody had gone after him. Unfortunately, this is where the video comes to an end because I didn't watch the documentary. I'd heard and I'd seen enough of Phillip Schofield at that point. I'd seen the person that he truly was. And I've got to be honest, since that documentary was released on Channel 5, we're now in the year 2026 and I've heard nothing of Phillip Schofield. It's probably for the best, but either way, let me know in the comment section down below, what did you think of this scandal?